Okay, let's begin then. We have Walid from Pakistan, Sheriff from Egypt, we have Fernando from Spain, Hannah from the UK, DWF, Antonio, NRG, Vincent, Dama Energy, and many more, even someone from Buenos Aires. So welcome everybody. So we're going to talk today about what is going on with renewables in East Africa. As you know, the African continent holds probably the biggest, the most opportunities for renewable energy development. It's a country that 1 billion people are still don't have access to electricity, therefore it's making it one of the largest markets. However, it is highly fragmented and it's not necessarily easy and straightforward. There's many different, I suppose, legislations, regulations. So you need to be able to navigate that in order to be successful in this region. We have 3 experts with us today who are going to discuss and give their point of view on these markets. And I'd like to welcome them today. First, I'd like to welcome Tony. Please, Tony, can you tell us something really short about yourself and where you're joining us from today?
Yeah, hello. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. So I'm joining from the UK. I'm the CEO and founder of Renewables in Africa, and as a clean energy consulting company and a media platform. So happy to be here today.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tony. Then I'd like to also welcome Bahid, an old friend of mine as well. We've been doing the rounds for a long time. Bahid, tell to our audience something about yourself and what you do.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I look after origination and project development at Access Power, which you'll hear about shortly.
And today you're joining from Dubai. So we have someone from the UK, someone from Dubai. And last but not least, Simba, could you please introduce yourself shortly and what you do?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simba Chikarango. I head the Projects and Infrastructure Finance Department in Trade and Development Bank, a regional development finance institution that covers East and Southern Africa with a special focus on renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so without further ado, since we have 3 presenters today, you know how it works. Tony, can you please start sharing your screen? We'll start explaining to everybody how it goes. We have a presentation from Tony. A presentation from Bahid, then a presentation from Simba, and then we'll take some questions. We're aiming for about 50 minutes today, okay? Your questions, please send them to me through the Q&A box at the bottom, and I'll take those. Maybe we'll have time for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 at the end. As I said, we're gonna be aiming for about 50 minutes today. And yeah, go ahead, Tony, go with your presentation. We'll take it from there.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So it's a pleasure for me to be joining today. That's the second time I'm joining the webinar. So I'm going to talk to you about the African green bond market, because this is a topic that we're hearing about more and more. And I thought I would cover that. So that's the agenda for today. So briefly talking about what is the company, my company that I run with other people working with me, the bond market, why we're actually looking at that, looking at the principle. That's important to know. Looking at some example of green bond happening in Africa. We're going to be talking about Kenya, because this is all about East Africa, and looking at the current status, and we're going to conclude very briefly. So what is renewables in Africa? So I'm hoping by now most of you will know who we are. We are a clean energy engineering consultancy. We essentially have 3 lines of services. So we provide energy investment opportunities to clean tech companies that are looking for deals in the market. We connect project owners with investors, provide insight and business intelligence to investors, and last but not the least, technical and financial advice to developers. So we are also known as a media platform, and we are a partner of this wonderful webinar, and that's and yeah, that's great. So now, if I had to talk about the green bond market, first of all, I thought it was important for us to understand why are we at all talking about the green bond? Yeah, that's important to set the scene. So we all know that the continent face 3 main challenges, right? So we need to increase the power, give more electricity to people. We need to ensure that there is a growth, there's a growth in terms of the economy, and we need to respect as well the international commitment. I'm talking about the Paris Agreement in here. At the same time, what has happened is UNEP has identified with regard to the climate change, Africa is a continent that is the most exposed due to the geographical position and also its ability to adapt. And on the right-hand side, you have a map that's sort of showing to you roughly what are the different issues that we're seeing going all the way from north, west, east to the south. And you can clearly see East Africa here with an example of desertification. That's an issue that needs to be addressed and the continent is facing. And with all of that, we know that we need to be building society that are climate resilient. And if we're talking about that, it's all about bringing as well sufficient finance to be able to tackle the issues. And when we are looking at what is needed, we all know by now that between 20 and 30 billion a year is needed until 2030. However, when we're looking at the global finance market, there's only 4% that is going to Africa. There's clearly something is still wrong, right? So we far from the level that we need to be addressing the issue significantly. So there is a need to diversify the different finance mechanisms that are there. So that's why people have been looking at the green bond. Very briefly, a bond is a financial instrument that gives you the opportunity to raise a loan to investor and give you the chance to pay the principal at the end of the maturity of the instrument. And with regard to the green bond, the specific feature here is the fact that the proceeds are all going towards green projects. And you can see here across the years from 2007 all the way to 2014. And by the way, I also have some figures for 2017, 2018. And you can see that the market has literally been exploding. Yeah, we're talking about now to the level of, that was 2014, roughly 40 billion a year. And in 2017, we were over 150 billion a year, and it's going to grow more and more. And when we're talking about the green bond, okay, so what are the principles that are guiding those green bonds? So the International Market Association has issued a number of principles. The first one is looking at the use of the proceeds. As I mentioned, we want the money to go towards the project. So it's important to make sure that you're able to identify and characterize what is considered green. Then your project evaluation, I think, is self-explanatory. The management of the proceeds, making sure that you direct that money going all the way to the right project, not the one people want to spend just for their own benefit, but to the green project. And clearly, there needs to be a reporting system to show that the system is actually working. So those are actually the key principles for the bond market. And when you're going through that, when you're issuing a bond, so you can actually issue that on your own behalf, or you can go to the certification. The benefit of having the certification, it gets more recognition from the investor, and obviously the results are better, right? So there needs to be a preparation, verification, the certification process that are going all through that. Now, if I'm talking about some example of green bonds in Africa, we actually have already 3 countries that have issued green bonds. So you may or may not know that Morocco has done one through the Sustainable Energy Agency, and they raised roughly about 120 million. So that was to finance 3 solar projects that were due to start last year. I think that was due to start. I think it was linked to the new project. And then you have Nigeria, which is actually the only African country that has issued a sovereign bond, and only the 4th across the world that has done it. And they raised about 420. And you have South Africa through the likes of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and the Cape Town municipality. And all those green bonds so far have been quite successful, but the preparation has been relatively good, I have to say. And if we're talking about Kenya per se, why Kenya? Because Kenya at the moment, or since 2017, has launched a 3-year program whereby they're looking at issuing a bond. And there has been a number of organizations coming together to be able to deliver this. And this is very clearly part of the Vision 2030, who's looking at transforming Kenya for it to become an industrial and middle-income country by this year, 2030, and also obviously dropping the level of greenhouse gases. So investing in this project to meet the Paris Agreement as well was clearly as well and a strong incentive for them to be looking at that. So the program has been launched, and where are we so far? So there has been a number of working stream that has happened, and I've listed some of them here. So there's been some further research as to how it can benefit Kenya, but not only Kenya per se, but the whole of the region. Then you obviously the creation of a certifier, because that's very, very much essential. If you remember, I mentioned that green bond needs to be not only certified, but also verified. So having people that can do that is very important. And you have others as well that I have listed there. And on the 20th of February, 2019, they launched a framework that actually defined the rule on how you can actually issue listed or unlisted green bond. And it was supported by organizations that I mentioned initially. So what kind of sector are targeted? Again, I've listed some of them here. You have energy, agriculture, transport, infrastructure. Sorry, there's a mistake there. Manufacturing, building, water, and waste management. So that's to give you a very broad overview of how the green market is going on in Africa. In conclusion, what I can say is actually there's only a tiny fraction of the money from the Green Primary Fund that goes to the continent. Clearly, it's still something wrong. We believe green bond can offer a solution, not the solution, but a solution. And looking at the progress across the world globally, we can see there's been a lot of benefit. And also, the bond market applied to Africa has shown as well a great prospect. And then by launching their program, Kenya is clearly positioning himself as a leader in the matter, and clearly wanting to focus on the Vision 2030, make sure that they can deliver that on time. So that was hopefully a very quick overview of what the green bond market. That's just a slide to talk about the solar tracker that we've issued. And I'm sure if you want to know more, make sure you click onto that link or connect with me. And it was a pleasure to talk to you. So there might be one or two questions. Be happy to answer that later.
Okay, so please send your questions through the Q&A box. Thank you very much, Tony. Let's hope we'll see more of these green bonds coming through in the African markets to facilitate investment. So if you can please stop sharing the screen, and don't worry everyone, we will send you the materials and the recording and everything so that you can access it again. If you need an introduction to Tony, we can facilitate that, but his email was also on the presentation. So we have Vahid's presentation up. I see that we're fully ready, so go for it, Vahid.
Thank you, Belen. So Tony did a great job talking about the financial products that are available to fuel the growth of renewables in East Africa. My presentation will focus on the more utility scale segment of that market. So if you go to the next slide, I want to just give you first a quick overview of Access. We are an IPP, an independent power producer, focusing on emerging markets. In Africa, we're active in about 15 countries. And in East Africa, we currently have 2 solar projects in Uganda. And we've also looked at developing projects in Kenya and Ethiopia. And across the whole spectrum, we're active in 23 countries where we have about 1,000 megawatts of solar and wind power projects at various stages of development or operation. So let's talk about East Africa. Next slide. The whole market currently is around 7,000 megawatts. That is the size of the pie. And it's a relatively chunky market, you would say. But what was really exciting is the fact that it's going to reach and exceed 14,000 megawatts in just the next 6 years, which means that the market is on track to double, which is very, very exciting when you're looking at it from an opportunity perspective. Now, next slide looks at the resources that this market has available. Let's start with the solar resources. Globally speaking, East Africa is amongst the best regions that you could ask for in terms of irradiance. Some of the markets in Ethiopia and also in Kenya and Tanzania have projects and sites reaching 2,500 kilowatt hours per year. This is world class. And even on average, you're looking at irradiance levels of over 1,800 kilowatt hours per year, which puts it well ahead of Germany, just to put it in perspective. And it hasn't been shy about exploiting its resources, companies such as ours have actually been very active in developing solar projects. And currently, you have over 200 megawatts of projects that either have signed PPAs or who are already under construction. So it shows you that it's definitely a market that is growing, and a market in which almost 10% of the generation is coming from solar. Next, let's look at the wind potential. Also, East Africa is graced with fantastic wind resources. It's one of the regions which is amongst the most windy in the world, with wind speeds exceeding 20 meters per second, which is unheard of. And even in the Lake Turkana and the Barrier Reef region, you have roughly 10 meters per second and above, which is probably puts it world.
Hello, am I the only one that I cannot hear, Vahid? Oh, here we go. Vahid, keep going. Sorry, we lost you there for a second, but you're back.
Yeah, I was saying currently the largest power project in all of East Africa is indeed a wind project, which is the Lake Turkana wind project, where it is generating power at a capacity factor of over 75%, which puts it well ahead of hydro and makes it a viable solution for baseload power generation. So both solar and wind represent fantastic opportunities in terms of a resource. Next slide. When we look at the market itself, it's worth pointing out that over the last 10 years, investors like Access have been pouring money into that region. In fact, some $10 billion, and I should clarify, it's not, $1 billion of US dollars, not Zimbabwean dollars, have actually gone into those specific markets, namely Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda, with all sorts of power projects, be it geothermal, wind, solar, and even thermal from natural gas and coal. So there has been massive expansion of power generation across all of East Africa. And next slide, please. Not surprisingly, what we have seen happening is that a galloping of power generation to not only meet demand, but in fact exceeding demand requirements. And today, you have over 800 megawatts of excess generation capacity. Now, this is not something that should be underestimated. Belen, in her opening remarks, mentioned that there's 1 billion people in Africa that don't have access to electricity. Whether or not that's the exact number, the point is that what is the myth here, the misconception, is that the problem lies in generation. But as we see, at least in East Africa, generation is not the issue. There's currently too much generation to meet the demand in the specific markets. The problem, next slide, please. The problem, it lies in interconnection. The problem is that whilst each of these markets generate power, they're not interconnected. And whilst the Eastern Africa power pool has been in discussions for many years, some of the high voltage lines connecting the major producers, namely Ethiopia and Kenya, to the major consumers, namely Tanzania and Rwanda, have not yet materialized. This means you have vacuums of power generation and power deficit. And just to give you an example, Tanzania currently is paying $500 million of power generation fees that it could otherwise be saving if it had the chance to import it at a lower cost from its neighbors. And equally, Ethiopia could be generating over $200 million if it had the lines to evacuate the excess generation to markets like such as Tanzania, which have currently over 400 megawatts of power deficits. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to conclude by saying that as we look at East Africa and as you're looking at opportunities, the most obvious opportunity other than the financing or the off-grid is, in my view, the interconnection and the T&D, transmission and distribution sector. Those sectors are currently in huge demand because all of these countries are trying to increase their interconnection with the other markets, either to export market power or to import market power. So if I have to say the #1 market in renewables and in power generation in East Africa, I would say it is the transmission and distribution market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vahid. You guys are being super on time today, actually. So congratulations. This almost never happens. So it's awesome when it does. So Simba, you're next up. So if you can share your screen. It's actually rare, as our audience knows very well, that people keep to the time they're allocated, but it's really good to see that you guys are, and I'm learning a lot actually. I had always suspected that an issue with the connection was there, but I didn't know that actually so sorted by here. But I'll get to you in the questions because I have a few for you guys. So can you put that on a large screen, please, Simba? We can still see it, but in a small connection. Now, if you go to display settings at the top. Oh, perfect. There we go. Off you go then.
Good afternoon. I'm going to talk about the current developments around the renewable energy in East Africa. By virtue of being a DFI that covers East and Southern Africa, we sort of have a bird's eye view in what is happening around East Africa and Southern Africa. I'll just briefly share who TDB is in the next 2 slides and go into sharing what we see across East Africa. Being a DFI, our mission is to provide development capital and services in East and Southern Africa through customer-focused innovative financing solutions. Our strategic goal is to be a preferred and leading trade and development finance institution in the region we cover. In terms of market footprint, a TDB footprint covers 22 member states with a total GDP, gross development product of 855 billion and a total population of 643 million. In terms of a brief history of TDB, TDB was formed as a result of the preferential trade area. We were formed through a charter in 1981 as the preferential trade area financing arm. And over the years, the bank has grown and transformed itself into a leading regional development finance institution. We cover 22 member countries. Our focus is around financing infrastructure and most importantly, energy, because we believe energy is a key economic enabler in all our member states. We rebranded from a PTA bank to TDB in 2017. The reason or the idea behind the rebranding was to reflect what the bank does in terms of trade and development and move away from a name that ties us to a geographical coverage. PTA transformed into COMESA, and COMESA is going to be soon the Grand Trade Free Area. So the idea was to have a name that reflects what we do. In terms of key developments that we see across East Africa, I'll start with Kenya. Being a DFI, we feel that Kenya has got a bankable dollar PPA, a cost-reflective tariff, which is very attractive for investors and developers. Currently, Kenya has got a very key focus on a geothermal baseload because it provides a baseload and it provides the least cost power option when the steam resources have been have been funded by GOK and bring IPPs to generate or steam and convert the steam into power. There is also a very key focus around generation mix diversification, most importantly to try and mitigate against the El Nino weather challenges. Currently, we're having a drought. The other 2 years we had a drought and hydro generation dropped, and hence thermal generation came into play and increased the final cost of power to customers. Like what Vahid has mentioned already, Kenya is a surplus market, although major customers complain of quality of supply challenges, which speaks to the transmission and distribution infrastructure, which also requires investment and upgrading to enable the quality of supply to improve. On grid and distributed solar projects are gaining traction because of the national grid challenges. For businesses and establishments that are far away from the national grid, we're seeing a lot of distributed solar projects gaining traction. Even on-grid utility scale projects, the PPAs now have started moving in KPLC and ERC. There was a slowdown towards the end of 2018 around solar, but with the solar prices coming down, we envisage to see a lot of traction and investment around on-grid solar and distributed solar grid projects, coupled with a need to diversify the generation mix. Kenya is also largely dependent on hydro, but it has larger geothermal resources, and there is a focus to develop those geothermal resources and increase the base load into the national transmission system. In Uganda, the Get Fit program that has just ended had a very, very positive impact in terms of increasing the generation capacity for medium-sized developers and projects. It also brought a bankable power purchase agreement and an implementation agreement, which attracted a lot of investment in Uganda. Isimba was commissioned in March this year, and Karuma is envisaged to be commissioned later this year. It will lead to Uganda to be a surplus market as well. Uganda is also largely dependent on hydro, which faces climate change threat on its hydro capacity. So we have also seen Uganda, despite having surplus capacity, being actively pushing for generation mix diversification. They also have got good irradiation, so they are pushing solar projects so that they diversify their generation mix and also mitigate themselves against the El Nino weather threat, which has brought consistent droughts in the East African region, and therefore they do suffer when the El Nino weather pattern brings drought to the region. A serious challenge that we see and an investment opportunity in Uganda is around the transmission system investment and upgrade. Most of the Get Fit projects, the hydros could not be dispatched once they got to COD because of lack of transmission system and a weak grid, especially in Western Uganda. So there's a need for significant investment and upgrade for the national grid and the distribution system, so that even when the large hydros are complete, they can also be able to export into the East African power pool. Uganda still grapples with quality of supply challenges, despite being soon to be a surplus market because of the poor national grid, which requires an upgrade and more investment. Tanzania is also a very interesting country that we do cover within East Africa. Unfortunately, the PPA is not bankable. There's lack of government support compared to Kenya, where we've got a letter of support which somehow backstops a political risk. In Uganda, Get Fit projects, medium-sized projects and large projects always come with an implementation agreement showing the government's desire to channel investment and provide a political risk backstop in those countries. Unfortunately, in Tanzania, that government support currently is not available. There is a focus on gas and a bit of hydro. They also have potential for solar and wind. Like most East African countries, they are close to the equator, and therefore they've got a good irradiation levels. Overall, as a DFI, we are supposed to address market failure, but in Tanzania, it has been a challenging market. We're pursuing a few wind projects and solar projects that will try and bring that we are trying to bank, but Tanzania still remains a challenging market with huge potential. Like what has been highlighted, Rwanda tends to have limited solar and wind opportunities. Their current focus is on Lake Kivu methane gas. They're looking at a third concession after Contour Global. Highland Group is bought out Symbion, which is the second concession on the lake. They are looking at awarding a third concession, another 50 megawatt concession on Lake Kivu, which is their key resource that they're trying to develop so that they can have a security of energy in Rwanda. But the key aspect to providing power in Rwanda lies in the East African power pool to try and meet their requirements and their ambitious plans to be an industrial hub in East Africa. The good thing in Rwanda, despite being a smaller market, they've got a bankable PPA, and the government support is available at all levels in terms of government guarantees for large projects and an implementation agreement to backstop our political risk. So we see opportunities, although limited, but there is a conducive economic environment to support renewable energy transactions in Rwanda. Ethiopia, as Fahid has mentioned, is also largely dependent on hydro, but which takes about 70% of their power generation. Given the El Nino weather challenge and the climate risks East Africa is facing, there is also a push for generation mix diversification and export of their excess hydropower to the East African power pool to show their seriousness and focus on diversifying their generation mix. Currently, there is a 500 megawatt scaling solar program that's currently underway, where 12 bidders have been pre-qualified, and enhancement of the East African power pool will actually provide Ethiopia with opportunities to export cheaper hydropower to its neighbors. In terms of financing trends, currently we're seeing a lot of interest, a lot of funds in various forms around renewable energy. One of the interesting aspects we are seeing of late is EPCF, where EPC contractors are providing funding, and then sponsors coming to lenders to reinvest or take out the EPC contractor. And we've seen a proliferation of blended funds, commercial funds, and concessionary funds being blended to provide funding for renewable energy projects. There's quite a lot of climate finance initiatives, green bonds, like what Tony has mentioned, targeted at financing renewable energy projects. We're also seeing deep-pocketed sponsors who are keen to finance 100% equity finance projects. We've seen this in Rwanda in one of the Lake Kivu concessions, where the sponsors are financing the project 100% by equity. We're also seeing a lot of off-taker credit enhancement products that are East African, in addition to the usual MEGA products or guarantor products. Most specifically, ATIA products, Africa Trade Insurance Agency, a sister organization to Trade and Development Bank. They've recently come up with the regional liquidity support facility to try and backstop off-taker liquidity risk. They also have another facility, the Africa Energy Guarantee Facility, to try and provide credit enhancement to projects within East Africa and the COMESA region at large. Overall, we've seen in the market from developers a push for project finance, light structures, and documentation. in its nature, project finance tends to be protracted and takes a long time to get to financial close. There has been consistent push to try and find a way the market can come up, DFIs and other project finance lenders can come up with project finance-like structures to try and cut the turnaround time to get to financial close for various renewable energy transactions. And I think the various initiatives around the EPCF 100% equity finance project point to the market trying to find structures that can get projects to quick financial close and bring lenders when construction risk and completion risk has been fully mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simba, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen. And thank you for keeping the questions. Oh, hi, Vahid. It's good to see you again. Your speech is quite timely. You know, you've stuck to the time. So we have some time to now ask some questions. And I saw that you've already been busy. You've been answering some of them. So thank you very much for that. But I'd like to start with some of the questions that people have already asked. And it's in regards to, Vahid, you mentioned it before. It's not generation that is an issue. You're saying, generation's fine, it's just the interconnection. So there is a few questions here on the back of that. One here that I like to start with says, if you are spending in transmission and interconnection, don't you kind of offset the sort of cheap cost of the reduced cost of renewables by having to invest into the large infrastructure? So wouldn't this make electricity more expensive rather than cheaper? So we will start with that. Having said this, I think, Bahir, when you mentioned that transmission and interconnection was the important thing in East Africa, I think you meant in connection to the 1 billion people that I was mentioning about, right? Is this particular that you're saying actually what we need is more infrastructure? Is that correct, or have I understood the wrong way around? We can't hear you. Can you switch on your microphone? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, now.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. What's needed is really interconnecting these markets so that they don't operate in halo. You have huge markets such as Kenya and Ethiopia that are already excess production and which were able to feed cheap electricity into markets such as Tanzania. And even if you factor in the cost of interconnection, over the 20 or 30 year period of these projects, the cost is incremental and certainly worth the investment. So I don't think that it's a huge encumbrance. And I think what investors should do is to speak with these governments, assist them in the upgrading of both the transmission and distribution networks so that the highways can open up and they can get access to this cheap electricity at 3 cents, 4 cents per kilowatt hour that is coming from Ethiopia and from Kenya.
Right, and there's a further question, sort of goes on the back of that one. It says, does this not mean the fact that, you know, we are actually having an issue with infrastructure? Does this not mean that the generation at the moment and the system is not decentralized enough, that it needs to be more decentralized and we need to organize it as such? And it says one of the biggest advantages of distribution generation is to reduce the need for distribution and transmission investments rather than to have to sort of force it.
Yes, it's true that if you had more decentralized, then there would be lower T&D costs. But the beauty of these large-scale projects is that you're generating at scale. So rather than doing a 1 megawatt project, if you could do a 50 megawatt project, you're going to get power generation at a fraction of the cost. And as Simba pointed out earlier, in Ethiopia alone, they've just launched a tender for 500 megawatts of power generation, which will come in at 3-4 cents a kilowatt. If you had centralized rate double, so you have to look at it from both perspectives.
Okay, does either of you want to add anything or give another perspective from the point of view of the investment, for example, or, you know, the cash? Simba, Tony?
give an investment perspective of what? Could you repeat
this particular thing? You know, yes, renewable energy is cheap, but then if we're claiming that what we need is more interconnection, then doesn't it make it more expensive? And if so, shouldn't we decentralize? You know, maybe think of mini grids, that sort of thing.
Okay, so from my perspective, I've always said that as far as renewable energy is concerned in Africa, there needs to be a two-way approach. So clearly, we need to extend the grid. So that's essential, especially for area where we have enough people to make it financially viable for the solution to be rolled out. But definitely, we need more mini grid to be installed as well. So having a better decentralization process, because there are areas whereby if you were to extend the grid over there, it's not going to make financial sense. So, but people over there, they still need power like all of us, right? So we can't just leave them behind. So we need to be looking at what is the other way to approach it. And when I'm thinking about that, having a decentralized approach will work. So I think the two for me should not be competing, but working together hand in hand to make sure that they can deliver the solution. So
you need a centralized planning system then for all of this to see what's best suited for each area.
Yes, we need, so that we can remove redundancy where there is. Surely there are places where we would need redundancy to be, but I guess it always goes hand in hand, because I think Vahid was saying that. So I always like to mention that perspective, especially from my engineering perspective, is it's good to be creating more generation, but if you can't export that generation, it serves nobody, right? So if I'm just saying in a silo with 1 gigawatt, whereby people actually need to serve 10 kilometers from me, 10 miles away from me, and I can't connect them, it doesn't work for it. So there's always going to be anyway a centralized plan to make sure that both the generation and the T&D work together, and it'll be the same as well for the mini grid plan and the grid expansion plan. That should be working hand in hand so that they don't actually overstep each other.
So a question here that I'd like to address to the both of you. I'm not sure who's going to have the right answer, or if there is an answer at all in here, but it's about the East African Power Pool. And it says here, does the East African Power Pool view Nasal Interconnector as a strategic project? And what potential does that project have in terms of capacity to transmit? Does either of you know anything about this particular interconnector in the East African Power Pool?
I don't have the detail with that. Maybe Simba can go on with that. So.
I think, Belen, like what has been highlighted, there's quite a lot of effort within East African countries to try and get the East African Power Pool up and running. There has been a lot of meetings and collaboration amongst East African countries to try and get the East African Power Pool up and running, because of the surplus power that will be in Ethiopia, Uganda, in Kenya, and you also have deficit countries, and more importantly, taking out the surplus that is going to come in the near future. East African countries have arrangements where they buy power to balance their grid and systems. They trade amongst themselves at any particular time in the year. So there are a lot of efforts going into trying to upgrade the East African Power Pool, so that there is the requisite investment, and trade on that platform can take off. I would say the Southern Africa Power Pool is slightly far ahead of our friends here in East Africa, but I think there is that desire and effort amongst all East African countries to invest and get the East African Power Pool up and running.
It's actually, I have been the last few months working in Southern Africa and Eastern Africa, with the World Bank and other large actors. And I have to say, it's impressive the amount of organization that is going towards electrifying and connecting all of those countries in the East African, the West African, and also South African. And I think it's very important that this happens. I actually think it might be a good opportunity for us to even have a further webinar, just specifically talking about this particular item, because I think it's going to change the African sort of horizon, of how we understand power connection, renewables. But thank you very much, Simba. There is two questions here. Either of you know anything about Djibouti, whether there is anything happening, because I'm unfamiliar with what's going on in Djibouti.
Yeah, Djibouti is a TDB member country. It has challenges around its security of power. We're looking at a solar project, and a few other renewable projects are in the pipeline. It's highly dependent on thermal generation, which is not good given the greening initiative across the continent. So there are opportunities in Djibouti. It's also close to the equator. There should be opportunities for it to increase its renewable energy generation assets and also displace the thermal generation that it is dependent on.
Yep.
I think if I can add just one thing here, because if I heard the question very well, I had the impression that maybe the person was looking at an initiative coming all the way from government or from some big institution. I just want to take the chance to remind to everybody on the phone that for people that are interested into the sector, they can actually also initiate project by themselves by linking up with the right organization, because it should not only be a top-down approach, but we should also have people at the grassroots at all levels participating as well. So what I would say is actually if the person has any particular interests or special knowledge about Djibouti, it's important to link up to people like myself, Simba, or whoever, to see how they can develop and move forward with their project, so that they can, because I believe there's not enough people in the sector working in renewables energy, and the people that are there, they tend to be sucked up into the usual suspect, I would say, if I may say so, the likes of Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania. As you can see, we're always revolving around the same people. But there are countries effectively like Djibouti that also need the same solutions. And it actually falls down to people that have particular knowledge to start bringing attention as well to those places, so that professionals can start looking at that as well. So that's why I wanted to say, which is a key point I want people to take away.
Believe it or not, my last question was going to be, whether you see more tenders, because it seems like all the companies are like, where's the tenders that I can move there? But actually, there could also be private PPAs, private off-takers, whether those are companies, whether they're, so there is a variety of routes. And I was going to ask, which of the routes do you see more as an opportunity for a company looking into these markets? Because government tenders are sweet, they're guaranteed, they're also usually very procedimentary, and they take ages, and they're large scale, and you're competing with a lot of other people. So I was going to ask you, where did you see the opportunities?
Should I leave you go first, Simba, and then I come to back with that?
That's fine. I think like what has been summarized in our presentations, East Africa is going to be a surplus market in terms of generation. Vahid highlighted to us that $1 billion has been invested in East Africa, and now we've got a surplus generation. There is talk of in Kenya to move to an auction market, which speaks to how secure the Kenyan government is in terms of the surplus they do have. And I think in terms of opportunities, where we see opportunities is in the transmission and distribution space mostly, and also on the generation front, especially around distributed generation, in terms of areas where there is significant economic activity. We were looking at a transaction that's looking at a greening tea initiative with Unilever, and Unilever being the off-taker. So the developer would have a PPA with Unilever as the anchor off-taker, and then the districts or the villages around Unilever tea estates would also benefit in terms of access to power. So on that front, where you've got an anchor off-taker who's got a good balance sheet, we see opportunities of distributed grids to grow and also then benefit the communities around a key off-taker. Because as a banker, if I don't have a long-term off-take and a bankable off-taker, in as much as I agree in being a development banker, that we need 100% access to power. But if there's no off-take and a long-term contract for the power to be bought, then that I cannot bank that particular transaction despite that development impact. But where we've got a distributed grid anchored by a profitable corporate that has got a balance sheet, we see opportunities around the distributed grids. Utility scale onto the grid, that will slow down. But what we have seen as TDB is that normally power generation leads demand. More industry that are power intensive are likely to come to East Africa because the cost of power will go down because of the surplus, and then still you need to plan your generation in terms of renewable energy and least cost. So we see opportunities mostly around distributed grids on the generation front, where they are anchored by a key off-taker with a strong balance sheet, and then we lend against their balance sheet. And we also see a lot of opportunities to bank transmission and distribution projects.
Okay, thank you. Tony, do you want to add anything?
Yes, very quick one, because I know we're running out of time. So this is a beautiful question, I would say. Yes, effectively, there are many tenders that are around, and people are always looking at that. But as you mentioned, the issue with tender is they always end up to be oversubscribed. And there's only one winner or a couple of winners, so lots of the other people won't have anything else to do. And it's a beautiful question simply because with one of our partners, which is Deep Blue, which is also one of your partners, Belen, we've actually launched a new initiative whereby we are sharing on our platform, which is the Deep Blue platform, the different tenders that are around in the continent. And also there is a private space that is run by Renewables in Africa, where we're talking about the private deals that we have, whereby you don't have a tender, you engage directly with a project owner, who could be a public entity or a private entity. And there are actually lots of those. So there's not only tenders. So for people that are looking for opportunities, I would definitely encourage them to get in touch with us so we can take them through the process, how we're engaging and how we put that at the disposal of people. Because remember, that's one of the first offers that I say Renewables in Africa does, is to bring direct investment opportunity. That's exactly what I was talking about, the private deals, to people who are looking for investment. So we've done the work for them.
That is excellent, actually, Tony. Making it easier, I think, is probably the first step to getting more,
excellent.
Encouraging more.
Exactly. And we even have a webinar on that, and I'm sure you're going to support us.
Absolutely, of course. All right, so we're all a big family, right? And we want to see this happen, actually. I think for us, I think in the end, it's difficult to gather people around things that, that don't understand very well. But I think the more information that we have, the easier it will become for everybody. I don't know if Bahid, because I've seen that you've come back in. I don't know, Bahid, if you want to join answering that question. Otherwise, don't worry, because I know that we're out of time a little bit. There's a couple of questions here for you, Simba, I think, if I'm not wrong, but I'm just gonna, you've replied to it. Yay, you guys, you're amazing. I think we've done most of the questions. I have a few more, but we're out of time. So we'll look into these power pools, because I think it's very, very important. I think it would be excellent if we could get East Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa to speak here to see what are the plans, so that everybody can understand, what these countries are doing and how they're moving towards unifying, the grid system. Thank you very much for your time, everyone in the audience, and of course, our dear experts. Bahid, even though I know I can see you there, but you're listening, but we cannot see your camera, but hey. So thank you very much for being there, for sharing with us. And I know Access as an IPP is going to be very much looking out for these opportunities. I understand that you guys also partner with local IPPs. Is that correct? Maybe I've gone.
Yes, that's correct.
So local IPPs, if you're looking for partners, contact Bahid. If you need contact details, come and contact us. We'll put you in touch. Tony's already spoken about what these guys do. They have a lot of information and access to the bonds. And of course, Simba as well. Thank you all for being here. And I hope that we keep on doing this every year and we see, you know, things actually move forward in the market. And please get in touch with us if you see that there's any opportunities for more information to be shared, or, you know, like, I suppose shared is the right thing with this market. Thank you very much and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.